Chapter 1. The human being is an archive of cosmic memories. In the silence of our psyche resides a pantheon of forces, characters, and patterns that direct our lives from the depths of the unconscious. If ancient wisdom connected us with the energy of the outer cosmos, this journey delves into the cartography of our inner universe, a domain governed by forces that esoteric tradition and depth psychology called archetypes. Knowledge of these patterns is not a simple psychological theory, but a science of the soul, an operations manual for the psyche that was encoded in a mythical text, the Tome of Archetypes. This text not only describes the architecture of the psyche, but also reveals the methods to activate and direct the primordial energies that reside within each of us. The legend of this sacred text resonates in the deepest archives of esoteric traditions in the East and West. It is spoken of as a book that transcends materiality, a book that is not printed in ink, but in the substance of consciousness itself. Among the initiates, it is known as the Tome of Archetypes, the Book of Primordial Forms, or the Mirror of Souls. The most persistent and verifiable story among the wisdom lineages places its discovery in a forgotten library, deep within a Tibetan monastery, nestled high in the mountains. A place shielded from the convulsions and distractions of modern history. This sanctuary, guarded by lamas dedicated to the study of the mind and emptiness, preserved knowledge that Western civilization had classified as superstition or myth. The tome itself was not a traditionally bound book, but a collection of 77 rectangular plates. These plates were composed of obsidian and jade, materials that absorb and retain psychic energy, and they were joined by a strange metallic alloy that, according to the accounts, pulsed with a faint internal light as if containing a battery of vital energy. The characteristic that elevated this tome to the category of sacred legend and confirmed its non-physical nature was that it was a living book that changes according to the reader. The older monks, dedicated to guarding the archive, claimed that the inscriptions and figures were not static. A reader could pass their hand over a page and clearly see the figure of the sage, the pattern of guidance and transcendent wisdom, while another, with an urgent psychic need, would immediately see the figure of the warrior, or perhaps the shadow. The tome was a mirror of the psyche that reflected the archetypal pattern that was either most active or most repressed in the reader's consciousness at that precise moment. Each plate of the tome showed a different archetypal figure, a primary character that did not represent a historical individual, but a field of pure, impersonal energy. These figures, drawn with geometric and symbolic precision, were not just images. They were generators of resonance that activated the reader's consciousness upon contact with their corresponding psychic pattern. The lover's plate emanated a perceptible warmth and a feeling of heart opening, while the judge's plate emitted a vibration of cold, precise fairness. Contact with the tome was not intellectual. It was a direct transfer of primordial energy. The legend reveals that this tome remained actively hidden for millennia, and the reason was the immense potency of misunderstood archetypal power. When humanity was in its initial stages of psychic development, direct exposure to these primordial forces often led to archetypal possession, where the individual was completely absorbed by a single pattern, such as the tyrant, the martyr, or the demon. People would completely identify with an archetype without being able to maintain a conscious distance, thereby losing psychic balance and falling into one-sidedness. The ancient esoteric schools, aware of this fragility of the human ego, understood that the archetype is a neutral power, but that the ego, without maturity and ethical guidance, uses it for destructive or self-limiting purposes. Therefore, the wisdom was encapsulated, encrypted, and protected from mass unconsciousness until the opportune moment. The present moment is that threshold. The vibrational changes on Earth, the collapse of rigid social structures, and the unprecedented expansion of global knowledge and neuroscience indicate that humanity is finally ready to work consciously with archetypal forces. Depth psychology, spearheaded by figures like Carl Jung, prepared the field by mapping the structure of the unconscious. Now, the work is no longer just analyzing dreams or neurosis, but consciously activating, directing, and integrating these forces into daily life. Reading the tome is no longer passive, as it was for the monks who merely guarded it. It is an act of psychic sovereignty and self-transformation. We are moving from being acted upon by archetypal patterns to being their conscious and responsible directors. The opening of the tome is the beginning of the era of psychic self-mastery. Chapter 2. To handle the power of the Tome of Archetypes, it is essential to shed superficial conceptions and understand the deep energetic nature of the archetypes. The word archetype, from the Greek archetypos, means primordial pattern or first mold. They are the original imprints of the universe, the blueprints with which consciousness has manifested throughout history. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung was the one who reintroduced the term into modern language, associating it with the revolutionary concept of the collective unconscious. Jung described the collective unconscious as the repository of inherited universal forms, innate patterns that are not personal, but are the accumulated experience of the evolution of human and pre-human consciousness. It is not a set of ideas learned from parents or school, but a psychic structure that all human beings share at birth. It is the universal origin of myths, religions, and dreams. The reason why figures like the Great Mother, the Wise Old Man, or the hero appear identically in cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries. It is fundamental to understand, in the context of magic and spirituality, that archetypes are not abstract ideas, but fields of energy with intelligence of their own. They are not mere concepts in the mind that can be changed by logic. They are units of conscious energy that have an autonomous existence on the plane of the collective psyche. One could say they are the living forces of creation that choose to manifest through the human psyche. When an archetype is activated in the individual psyche, this energy is infused into consciousness, altering the emotional state, thought patterns, and even the body's biochemistry, preparing the system for a specific behavior. Archetypes are the energetic and electrochemical templates that consciousness uses to manifest a fundamental behavior. The Tome of Archetypes insists on drawing a clear difference between the archetype, the pure pattern, and the manifestation, the individual expression. The archetype is the template of pure energy. For the tome, the warrior archetype is the pure pattern of decisive action, boundary defense, courage, and discipline. It is a fundamentally neutral energy, essential for survival and progress. The manifestation is how that pure pattern is expressed through the filter of the individual ego, personal history, and cultural environment. A positive and conscious manifestation of the warrior can be a leader who defends their community with honor, a scientist who fights for the truth against the status quo, or the individual who submits to strict physical and mental discipline. A negative or shadow manifestation is a bully, an abuser, or a tyrant who uses force for domination. The archetype remains pure. The manifestation is filtered, distorted, or elevated by personal consciousness. The work of the initiate, revealed in the tome, is to align the individual manifestation with the purity of the archetypal pattern, using the power without falling into its shadow. Archetypes have a vital structural function. They structure the human psyche from deep levels. They are the unchangeable foundations upon which personality is built throughout life. If the personality with its habits and social roles is the finished house, the archetypes are the fundamental architecture, the building code that determines where the foundations, doors, windows, and rooms will be. For example, the shadow archetype is what organizes all the psychic material that has been deemed unacceptable, repressed, or denied by the ego to maintain an acceptable identity. The ego archetype is the organizing principle that centers consciousness around a functional identity. We can conceive of archetypes as organs of the soul, where each one has a specific and irreplaceable function. Just as the physical body needs a heart to pump blood, kidneys to filter, and lungs to breathe, the soul needs the warrior to set limits and fight, the healer to restore balance and health, the lover to connect and feel life, and the sage to guide. A healthy and functional psyche, according to the tome, is one in which all archetypal organs are functioning, not in isolation, but in cooperative harmony and with the right intensity for the moment. Neurosis and internal conflict are often the manifestation of an atrophied or overloaded archetypal organ. Finally, the Tome of Archetypes introduces us to the great secret of psychic mastery, the distinction between spontaneous activation and conscious activation of archetypes. Spontaneous activation occurs daily when an external situation or internal crisis detonates an archetypal pattern without the direct intervention of consciousness. For example, the sight of extreme injustice can spontaneously and uncontrollably activate the warrior's energy, anger, or the fight response. The loss of a loved one can activate the orphan or wanderer archetype. These spontaneous activations often feel as if something else takes control of the body and emotion, and they are usually inefficient or destructive, as the archetype, with its immense power, takes the reins without the measured guidance of the conscious self. Fear of failure, for example, is a spontaneous activation of the shadow or the saboteur. Conscious activation, which is the goal of this study and the central teaching of the tome, is the intentional and deliberate act of invoking a specific archetypal pattern to meet a precise need of consciousness. If the conscious being needs courage, they consciously invoke the warrior archetype, not anger. If the soul needs restoration, they invoke the healer. If they need wisdom for a decision, they invoke the sage. Consciousness becomes the conductor of an inner orchestra, choosing which instrument to play, with what intensity, and for how long, ensuring that archetypal power serves the soul's purpose and not the blind impulse of the unconscious. This is the essence of psychic sovereignty and the first great secret that the Tome of Archetypes comes to reveal to humanity. It is the step from being a puppet of internal forces to being the master of one's own destiny. Having established the mythical origin of the Tome of Archetypes and the definition of the archetype as a primordial pattern of conscious energy, we must now move from theory to practical manifestation. The tome insists that archetypes are not just abstract concepts of the mind, but living forces that express themselves through matter, affecting every cell, gesture, and emotion. Chapter 3. The first great secret that the tome reveals is that each archetype has a specific and measurable energetic signature. On the subtle plane, archetypes are toroids of pulsing energy, each with a unique vibration frequency, dominant color, and movement pattern. For example, the warrior has a fast, sharp frequency associated with red and iron, while the sage has a slow, deep frequency associated with indigo and ether. The initiate, by consciously tuning into this signature, can access its power. This primordial energy does not remain on the subtle plane. Archetypes manifest powerfully in the body, in postures, gestures, and internal biochemistry. The physical body is the final terminal of archetypal manifestation. When the martyr archetype is active, the body shrinks, the shoulders curve, the chest closes, and the gesture is one of supplication or resignation. This posture, in turn, triggers a biochemical response, an increase in stress hormones, and a decrease in vitality. In contrast, when the hero archetype is activated, the body expands, the spine straightens, and the chin lifts. This power pose, verified by modern science, reduces cortisol and increases testosterone, preparing the body for action and positive domination. The tome teaches that if you want to change the archetype that is dominating you, you must first change your body posture to break the negative biochemical feedback loop. The physical gesture is the first command to the unconscious. The most advanced science, and the ancients already knew it intuitively, reveals the as, direct connection between the activated archetype and changes in the personal electromagnetic field. Every human being is surrounded by an energy field or aura, which is the result of the electrical activity of the organs. When an archetype, like the lover, is activated, the heart radiates coherence, a rhythmic and strong wave pattern that can be measured. This cardiac coherence expands the personal electromagnetic field, making the individual more magnetic and attractive. Conversely, the activation of a shadow archetype, like the critical judge, produces incoherence in brain and heart waves, contracting and weakening the auric field, making us feel isolated and repelling connection. Conscious tuning is not just about feeling better. It is about modifying the quality of the energy we radiate to the world. The Tome of Archetypes uses mythology as the universal language to study these energies. Gods and heroes are, in essence, personifications of universal patterns and pure forms of energy. Zeus, the pattern father, embodies law, order, and authority. Athena, the warrior goddess and strategist, embodies focused will united with wisdom. Hermes, the messenger god, embodies communication, cunning, and mental speed. The study of mythology is not a historical pastime, but the reading of a vast map of the human psyche. Each story is a coded manual on how these energies interact, conflict, and resolve. The great mythological researcher, Joseph Campbell, confirmed the fundamental teaching of the tome through his concept of the monomyth, the hero's journey as an archetypal map. Campbell demonstrated that all of the heroic stories in the world, from Odysseus to the Buddha, follow the same sequence of events: the call to adventure, the refusal, the meeting with the mentor, the sage, the ordeal, the death and rebirth, and the return with the elixir. This monomyth is not a literary pattern. It is the process of individuation etched into the collective unconscious, the map for the transformation of consciousness from an immature state to a state of mastery. By consciously identifying with the stages of the hero's journey, we activate the hero archetype, which gives us the strength to face our own inner dragons. The fundamental reason for the universality of these patterns is resonance with the archetypal field. The constant appearance of the same figures in cultures without contact, such as the Great Mother in Africa, Europe, and America, is not a historical coincidence, but proof of the existence of the collective unconscious. Every time an individual lives, dreams, or invokes an archetype, they strengthen that collective energy field. Archetypes are not human inventions, but morphological fields of pure information that the individual psyche simply decodes. By tuning into the warrior, we instantly connect with the primordial force of all warriors, heroes, and defenders who have ever existed. This access to the unlimited power of the collective unconscious is what makes conscious archetypal activation an act of transformative power. Chapter 4. The Tome of Archetypes, in its deepest chapters, describes the human psyche not as a unitary entity, but as an ecosystem of multiple archetypes, a vast inner universe where various forces coexist and compete. It calls it the inner pantheon, a council of gods and forces that must be governed by the conscious self. Psychic well-being depends entirely on archetypes in balance versus archetypes in conflict. In a healthy psyche, the warrior gives courage to the hero, the sage advises the king, and the lover softens the judge's justice. Balance is the fluid dance of these energies according to need. However, conflict occurs when two mutually exclusive archetypes try to dominate at the same time, such as the lover seeking fusion and the warrior seeking limits in an intimate relationship. The tome provides the methods to establish a hierarchy and an internal dialogue, resolving these conflicts through mediation. The most dangerous form of imbalance is archetypal possession, which occurs when an archetype pathologically dominates consciousness. In this state, the individual is literally possessed by the energy. The martyr's energy takes control, and the person begins to unconsciously seek suffering to satisfy the pattern. The tyrant's energy takes control, and the person loses empathy. During an archetypal possession, the ego merges with the archetype, and the person loses free will, acting on the autopilot of that pattern without being able to see other options. Addictions and obsessions are often possessions by a shadow archetype or an unintegrated pattern. Equally destructive is the opposite situation, psychic emptiness, which occurs when an archetype is absent or repressed. The psyche is a closed system that abhors a vacuum. The repression of an essential archetype, such as the warrior, capacity to defend oneself, or the lover, capacity for connection, leaves a gap in the psychic structure. This void is immediately filled by a maladaptive substitute force. An individual who represses the warrior becomes a chronic victim, attracting aggression, or manifests explosive, uncontrolled anger. An individual who represses the lover may become obsessed with work, seeking connection and passion in professional achievement. Healing, according to the tome, is not filling the void, but activating the repressed archetype to fulfill its original function. An essential concept in archetypal mastery is that of the archetypal shadow. Every archetype has light and darkness. There is no inherently bad archetype. There is only the unconscious use of a powerful force. The hero shadow is arrogance and the need for recognition. The healer's shadow is the martyr and the compulsive savior. The shadow is not the opposite of the archetype, but its degenerate, immature, or unintegrated form. It is the way the archetype manifests when driven by fear, selfishness, or trauma. The shadow is crucial because it contains the raw, unrefined energy of the archetype that is necessary for wholeness. Therefore, the goal of conscious activation is not to eliminate negative archetypes, but to integrate all of them in harmony. The psyche does not need an army of saints and sages. It needs a complete pantheon that includes the trickster for flexibility, the fool for spontaneity, and the destroyer for creating new space. True mastery consists of the integration of the shadow. When the warrior unites with its shadow, aggression, the individual gains a dark but controlled strength, which they can use to destroy internal psychic barriers, but which they no longer project onto others. Wholeness is the state of being where the individual can access any archetype in their inner pantheon, including its shadow, without being possessed by it. Life then becomes a conscious art, a perfectly orchestrated ballet of forces. Chapter 5. The first page of the tome that radiates light shows a figure enveloped in golden and emerald green radiance with outstretched hands from which healing light emanates. The eyes of this figure are deeply compassionate. Their posture is one of complete openness, and around their head, a halo of light shines, suggesting holiness without specific religion. This is the representation of the healer, the first of the 4 fundamental archetypes that the tome reveals as essential for human wholeness. The healer's energy is perhaps the most recognizable because it is the one we most naturally associate with restoration and well-being. But it goes far beyond curing physical diseases. It is the fundamental capacity to hold space for healing to occur, to create a safe container where what is wounded can reveal itself without fear, where what is fragmented can reunite, where what is sick can find its way back to health. The healer carries a quality of presence that is in itself medicine. It does not need to do anything specific. Its mere presence with total attention and genuine compassion creates a field where others can begin to heal. It is like fertile ground that does not force the seed to grow but provides all the necessary conditions for natural growth to occur. The healer does not impose health, but facilitates the inherent process of self-healing that exists in every living organism. The healer's compassion is not pity or sorrow. It is a deep recognition of shared suffering, a visceral understanding that the pain of the other could be one's own, that at a fundamental level, there is no separation between healer and healed. This compassion allows the healer to approach suffering without being consumed by it, to witness pain without fleeing or trying to fix it prematurely, to simply be with what is. The healer also carries an instinctive knowledge of what each situation needs. It does not apply a rigid protocol, but responds fluidly according to wisdom that emerges in the moment. Sometimes the medicine is a gentle touch. Sometimes it is a word of encouragement. Sometimes it is simply shared silence. Sometimes healing requires decisive action. Other times it requires infinite patience. The healer knows because they listen deeply, not only with their ears, but with their whole being. Chapter 6. The mythological manifestations of the healer appear in practically every culture, a testament that this archetype is truly universal, inscribed in the collective human psyche. In the Greek tradition, Asclepius was the god of medicine, whose symbol, the staff with a coiled snake, is still used in modern medicine. Hygeia, his daughter, personified preventive health, healing through living in harmony with natural laws. In Asia, Kuan Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion, is invoked by millions as the supreme healer. It is said that she listens to the world's lamentations and responds with infinite compassion, that her tears turn into lotus flowers that float on the waters of suffering. Her image, serene and compassionate, carries in her multiple hands symbols of different forms of healing. In Christianity, Christ is the archetypal healer par excellence. The Gospels are full of accounts of miraculous healings, but more profoundly, Christ represents the principle that love itself is medicine. That connection with the divine restores wholeness. His compassion for the marginalized, the sick, the sinners, exemplifies the healer's energy that does not judge but embraces. In Native American traditions, the shaman or curandero carries the healer's energy, serving as a bridge between the spiritual and physical worlds, invoking healing powers from plants, spirit animals, and natural forces. The shaman understands that illness is frequently soul loss, a fragmentation of the self, and that healing is soul retrieval, a reintegration of what was separated. These mythical figures are not just stories of the past. They are living representations of an archetypal pattern that exists within every human being, waiting to be recognized and activated. When we contemplate these figures, something in us resonates, recognizes, "This also lives in me." Chapter 7. The inner healer is active when we can approach our own pain or the pain of others with compassion instead of with judgment or rejection. It is active when we feel a genuine impulse to alleviate suffering, when our heart opens to the vulnerability of others, when we find deep satisfaction in being of service for the restoration of well-being. Signs of an active healer include the ability to be present with difficult emotions without the need to fix them immediately, the ability to listen deeply without interrupting with premature solutions, a natural inclination towards activities that nurture and restore both oneself and others, sensitivity to the subtle needs of one's own and others' bodies, genuine interest in healing practices, whether conventional or alternative. When the healer is active, there is a sense of energy flow through the hands, particularly the palms. There may be warmth, tingling, pulsation. The heart feels expanded, open. Breathing tends to deepen naturally. There is a sense of being connected with something greater than the personal self, of being a channel for a healing force that flows through but does not originate in the ego. But when the healer is asleep, the person is disconnected from their own capacity for self-care and for authentically caring for others. It can manifest as hardness, as an inability to feel genuine compassion, as a rejection of one's own or others' vulnerability. It may appear as an addiction to being busy, as an avoidance of the stillness where healing occurs, or it may manifest as a complete dependence on external authorities for healing without recognizing the inner healer. A person with a dormant healer may be chronically physically ill because they are not accessing their own self-healing resources. They may have difficulty in relationships because they cannot offer the kind of nurturing presence that deep connection requires. They may feel empty, purposeless, because one of the deepest sources of meaning, serving the well-being of others, is inaccessible. Chapter 8. But the healer, like all archetypes, has a shadow. The most common manifestation of the healer's shadow is the martyr. The person who compulsively sacrifices themselves for others without attending to their own needs to the point of exhaustion and resentment. The martyr uses giving as a way to avoid receiving, as a way to maintain control through making others dependent, as a way to avoid their own unhealed wounds by keeping busy healing others. The compulsive savior is another manifestation of the shadow. This person needs others to be sick or needy to feel self-worth. They unconsciously sabotage the independence of those they help, because if they fully heal, the savior loses their role, their identity, their purpose. This is the therapist who keeps clients dependent indefinitely, the parent who infantilizes adult children, the activist who is completely defined by the causes they defend and who would feel lost without them. Perhaps the deepest shadow of the healer is the wounded healer who has not healed their own wounds but tries to heal others. This is a fundamental principle in healing work. We cannot genuinely give what we do not possess. If our own wounds are festering, infected, unrecognized, they will contaminate our attempts to heal others. We will project our own unmet needs onto those we try to help. We will use the healing of others as a way to avoid our own healing. The tome is emphatic on this point. Before the healer can operate in its highest expression, it must first turn toward itself with the same compassion it offers to others. It must recognize and attend to its own wounds. It must allow itself to be vulnerable, to be needed, to receive care. The true healer has walked through their own dark night and emerged transformed, and it is this experience of having healed that gives them genuine authority to facilitate healing in others. Chapter 9. Practices for activating the healer begin with visualization. One sits in stillness, closes the eyes and breathes deeply. One visualizes a golden or bright green light descending from above, entering through the crown of the head, filling the entire body. This light is not ordinary, but is conscious, intelligent light that knows exactly where healing is needed. One allows this light to flow into any area of the body that needs attention. It may be an area of physical pain, emotional tension, or energetic blockage. The light penetrates, dissolves, and transforms. One does not force it, but allows it. One trusts the inherent intelligence of the healing light, which is actually the intelligence of the inner healer activating itself. Then, one visualizes this light accumulating in the hands, particularly in the palms and fingertips. The hands become portals of healing energy. One can place the hands on one's own body over areas that need healing and simply hold them there, allowing the energy to flow. There is no need to do anything. Healing occurs naturally when we create the right conditions. This practice can extend outward. One can visualize another person, perhaps someone known to be suffering, and direct this healing light towards them with pure intention. One does not try to control how they will receive the energy or what form their healing will take. One simply offers it, sends it with love, and trusts that it will be received and used according to the higher wisdom of their own being. The practice must always end with gratitude, thanking the healing force that flowed, recognizing that we are channels but not the source, that we serve but do not control. This recognition keeps the ego in its appropriate place and prevents inflation, which is an ever-present danger in healing work. Chapter 10. The healer's body has specific characteristics that can be consciously cultivated. The posture is open, never closed or defensive. The chest is expanded, allowing the heart to offer itself energetically. The shoulders are relaxed, lowered, without the tension that comes from trying to protect oneself. The spine is erect, but not rigid, allowing for the free flow of energy. The hands are particularly important. The palms are naturally open and receptive. The fingers are relaxed, not cramped or clenched. When the healer touches, they do so with gentleness, but also with firm presence. It is not a tentative touch that communicates doubt, but a touch that says, "I am here. I have you. It is safe to let yourself feel." The healer's breathing is deep and conscious. It is not the shallow breathing of anxiety or the contained breathing of fear. It is breathing that reaches the abdomen, that fully oxygenates, that calms the nervous system. This breathing creates a field of calm that others can feel and in which they can begin to relax. The healer's eyes are soft, neither penetrating nor invasive, but also not evasive. It is a gaze that can hold eye contact without causing discomfort, that communicates. I see you. I recognize your humanity, your pain, your beauty. It is a gaze that does not judge, but completely accepts what is. The healer's voice, when speaking, is modulated, calm, without harshness. The tone is compassionate without being condescending. The rhythm is paused, allowing words to be truly heard rather than merely listened to. And frequently, the healer keeps silent, recognizing that compassionate silence is often more healing than words, however well-intentioned they may be. Chapter 11. The tome contains stories of the transformation of people who consciously activated their inner healer. One woman who had suffered from chronic illness for years, who had visited countless doctors without finding lasting relief, finally turned inward. She began a daily practice of visualizing the healer, placing her hands on her own body with compassion that she had never before offered herself. For months, she continued the practice faithfully. At first, nothing seemed to change externally, but internally, something profound was happening. She was developing a completely new relationship with her body, no longer as an enemy that betrayed her, but as an ally that was asking for attention, care, and listening. She was activating her own self-healing resources that had been dormant under layers of self-judgment and dependence on external authorities. Gradually, the symptoms began to diminish, not dramatically or suddenly, but steadily, sustainedly. And more important than the physical improvement was the transformation of her relationship with herself. She had become her own healer, not in the sense of rejecting medical help when appropriate, but in the sense of recognizing that she was an active participant in her healing, not a passive recipient of treatment. Another story involves a man who worked in a high-pressure profession, completely disconnected from his capacity to care and nurture. His healer was so asleep that he did not even recognize when his own body was asking for rest, when his emotions needed to be processed, when his relationships needed attention. He operated like a machine, efficient but empty. A health crisis forced him to stop. In recovery, he discovered the tome and began to work with the healer archetype. At first, it was extremely uncomfortable. He felt that being in contact with vulnerability and need was an unforgivable weakness. But he persisted, and gradually the healer began to wake up. He discovered that he could hold space for his own emotions without being overwhelmed. He began to notice the subtle needs of his body and respond to them with care. And surprisingly, he began to connect with others in a completely new way. His relationships deepened because he could now offer genuine presence instead of just functional efficiency. He became a more present father, a more connected husband, a more reliable friend. The healer had transformed not only his health, but his entire life. Chapter 12. The third luminous page of the tome shows a radically different figure. This figure stands in a power stance with a perfectly erect spine, clearly defined muscles, and a penetrating, focused gaze. In one hand, he holds a sword, in the other, a shield. But he is not a figure of blind violence, but of conscious, disciplined strength, serving protection rather than destruction. This is the warrior, the second fundamental archetype. The warrior's energy is that of courage, determination, and the capacity to act decisively even in the face of fear. It is the force that establishes clear boundaries, that says no when it is not appropriate, that defends what is valuable. Without the warrior, we are passive, easily victimized, incapable of making our intentions manifest into reality. The warrior is the one who gives the healer's compassion teeth and ensures that kindness does not become a weakness that invites abuse. But the warrior is not just physical strength or aggression. In its highest expression, It is a spiritual warrior, fighting not against external enemies, but against one's own ignorance, fear, and inertia. It is the discipline that sustains spiritual practice when initial enthusiasm fades. It is the will that persists through obstacles when it would be easier to give up. It is the courage that confronts one's own shadow instead of projecting it onto others. The warrior also carries a quality of alert presence, of being completely here now, aware of the surroundings, ready to respond. He is not lost in fantasies of the past or future, but anchored in this moment where real action occurs. This alert presence is in itself a form of meditation, of being fully alive in the present moment. Chapter 13. The mythological manifestations of the warrior are abundant. Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom and strategic war, represents the warrior who fights intelligently, who uses tactics in addition to force, who prefers victory through wisdom over victory through bloodshed. She was born fully armed from the forehead of Zeus, symbolizing that the true warrior is born from the enlightened mind. Mars, the Roman god of war, embodies the more aggressive aspect of the warrior, pure force and bravery in battle. But even Mars had his rules, his code of honor. The warrior without a code is simply a violent criminal. The code is what distinguishes the warrior from the thug. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu sacred text, Arjuna is the archetypal warrior facing a supreme moral dilemma. He must fight in battle against his own relatives. Krishna teaches him that there are times when the warrior must act, when not acting would be a greater mistake than acting. He teaches him about dharma, about right duty, about acting without attachment to results. This is the essence of the spiritual warrior. The Japanese samurai, with their Bushido code, represents perhaps the most refined expression of the warrior archetype. The samurai was not only a fighter, but a martial artist, a poet, a practitioner of the tea ceremony. He integrated force with culture, aggression with refinement, the capacity to kill with a deep appreciation of beauty and life. For the samurai, the sword was an instrument for the protection of the sacred, not for aggression itself. Chapter 14. The inner warrior is active when we can defend our boundaries appropriately, when we can say no without paralyzing guilt, when we can protect what we value without apologizing. It is active when we feel courage rise up in the face of injustice, when we are willing to take action even if it is uncomfortable or risky, when we can stand firm in our truth even when others pressure us to conform. Signs of an active warrior include the ability to maintain clear boundaries without aggression or passivity, the ability to act decisively when the situation requires it, discipline to maintain a practice or routine even when emotional motivation is lacking, courage to face difficult situations instead of avoiding them, willingness to defend others who cannot defend themselves, a sense of personal honor and adherence to an internal ethical code. When the warrior is active, there is a sense of concentrated energy, particularly in the solar plexus and the muscles. The posture naturally straightens, the gaze focuses. There is a sense of being ready, capable, willing. Fear may be present, but it does not paralyze. It becomes fuel for appropriate action instead of an excuse for inaction. But when the warrior is asleep, the person is passive, easily intimidated, incapable of defending their own interests. They allow others to violate their boundaries repeatedly. They avoid conflict at all costs, even when confrontation would be healthier. They feel powerless, victimized, without agency. They may have fantasies of revenge, but never act, remaining trapped in passive resentment. A person with a dormant warrior may repeatedly find themselves in abusive relationships because they cannot establish or maintain boundaries. They may be exploited at work because they cannot negotiate or defend their worth. They may have dreams and goals, but never pursue them with the necessary discipline and determination to realize them. They live a life of constant surrender, not healthy spiritual surrender, but defeated capitulation. Chapter 15. The shadow of the warrior is violence without purpose, aggression for its own sake, bullying, domination of the weak. It is war as a sport, as a way to prove insecure masculinity. It is the compulsive need to win, to always be on top, incapable of collaborating or sharing power. It is a rigidity that cannot adapt, that would rather die than admit error or change course. The warrior in shadow cannot surrender appropriately, cannot lower their guard even when it is safe, even when intimacy requires vulnerability. They live in a state of perpetual hypervigilance, seeing threats where there are none, incapable of genuinely relaxing. They treat every interaction as a competition, every relationship as a battle to be won or lost. Another manifestation of the shadow is cowardice disguised as a warrior. This person talks tough, dresses intimidatingly, perhaps owns an arsenal of weapons, but when a true threat appears, they collapse or attack disproportionately out of panic. They are not a true warrior, but a fragile facade over unconfronted fear. The warrior can also become a mercenary, fighting for any cause that pays best, without ethical discrimination, without a personal code of honor. This is a warrior who has lost their soul, who has reduced the sacred art of protection to mere economic violence. It is the soldier who commits atrocities because they were just following orders, abdicating individual moral responsibility. The tome teaches that these shadows emerge when the warrior is separated from the heart, when strength is not tempered by compassion, when courage is not guided by wisdom. The healthy warrior must operate in service of something greater than the ego, must be integrated with the healer who remembers the value of life, with the lover who remembers what is worth protecting, with the alchemist who transforms reactive violence into conscious action. Chapter 16. Practices for activating the warrior begin with power poses. One stands with feet firmly planted on the ground, approximately shoulder width apart. The spine is straightened completely, as if an invisible cord were pulling the crown upward. The shoulders are pulled back, opening the chest. The hands form fists or are placed on the hips. The jaw is slightly clenched. The gaze is focused on a specific point ahead, not wandering but penetrating. One breathes deeply into the lower abdomen, into the hara, the center of power in Eastern martial traditions. With each inhalation, one feels strength filling the body. With each exhalation, one expels doubt, fear, and hesitation. One holds this posture for several minutes, feeling how the body communicates to the nervous system and the psyche. I am strong. I am capable. I am ready. Modern research has validated that power poses actually affect brain chemistry, increasing testosterone and decreasing cortisol, producing an internal state of greater confidence and less anxiety. This is not self-deception, but the conscious use of the body-mind connection to activate internal resources. Another powerful practice is the verbal declaration of boundaries. One practices saying out loud, with firmness but without aggression, "No, this is not acceptable. This is my limit." One practices in a mirror, observing body language, adjusting until the entire being, body and voice, communicates firmness without hesitation. Then, one practices in low-risk situations before using it in situations where it truly matters. One can also work with the visualization of the inner warrior. One visualizes a completely empowered, strong, brave, and capable version of oneself. This internal figure stands behind oneself, like an invisible but energetically real bodyguard. One consciously invokes this presence when facing a situation that requires courage. One allows the inner warrior to lend its strength until it has been completely integrated and no longer feels separate. Chapter 17. The warrior's body has a distinct physical signature that can be observed and cultivated. The spine is straight, strong, like a tree that can bend in the wind but not break. The muscles are toned, not necessarily bulky but clearly with functional strength. There is a sense of being rooted in the earth, of body weight moving down toward the ground rather than floating anxiously. The warrior's shoulders are back and down, never shrugged toward the ears in defensive tension. The chest is open, vulnerable but fearless, communicating. I have nothing to hide. I am willing to face whatever comes. The hands are relaxed, but ready. They can form a fist in an instant if necessary, but are not permanently tense. The warrior's jaw is firm without being chronically clenched. There is determination in the set of the mouth, but also the capacity to smile, to soften when appropriate. The eyes are focused, alert, but not paranoid. They scan the environment with situational awareness without anxious hypervigilance. The warrior's movement is decisive, direct. There is no hesitation or apology in gestures. When they walk with purpose. When they are still, they are completely still, not restless. There is an economy of movement. Nothing is wasted. Every action has a clear intention. The warrior's breathing comes from the lower abdomen, the hara. It is not high chest breathing that signals anxiety. It is deep breathing that generates power, that centers, that stabilizes. In martial arts, the battle cry, the kiai, comes from this center, carrying all the force of the being focused in one moment. The warrior must be invoked in specific situations. When someone is repeatedly violating our boundaries and gentle words have not worked, it is time for the warrior. When an important project is stalled by our own lack of discipline, we need to invoke the warrior who can maintain structure and persist through internal resistance. When injustice is occurring and silence would be complicity, the warrior gives us the courage to speak or act. When we face our own fears, when we must do something that is frightening but that we know is right, the warrior is the one who walks toward the fear instead of away from it. When we are being tested, when external circumstances or internal forces question our determination, the warrior is the one who does not back down. But it is crucial to also know when not to invoke the warrior. Not in moments that require receptivity, softness, surrender. Not in conflicts where listening and compromise are more appropriate than firmness and boundaries. Not as a first response, but as a resource when other approaches have been appropriate and have failed. The misguided warrior creates damage. The appropriately invoked warrior protects, defends, and makes it possible for the work of the healer, the lover, and the alchemist to occur in a safe space. The warrior is the guardian of the temple, not the priest, but without guardians, the temple is vulnerable. Chapter 18. The third radiant page of the tome shows a figure completely different from the previous ones. This figure has a soft, open posture, with arms extended as if in an embrace. The heart is clearly illuminated, radiating pink and golden light. The eyes are soft, filled with tenderness. Symbols of beauty float around the figure. Flowers, music, art. This is the manifestation of the lover, the third fundamental archetype. The lover's energy is that of heart opening, the capacity to connect deeply, to feel not only one's own emotions, but to resonate with the emotions of others. It is the appreciation of beauty in all its forms, sensuality without necessarily being sexual, the capacity to fully enjoy sensory experience. It is the force that draws us toward connection, that dissolves the boundaries of the separate self, that reminds us that love is our fundamental nature. The lover carries passion, not just romantic, although that is one expression, but passion for life itself, enthusiasm for existing, a deep appreciation for the miracle of being alive and conscious. When the lover is active, the world is vivid, colors are brighter, flavors are more intense, touches are more meaningful. There is a feeling of being completely alive in the body, celebrating incarnation instead of trying to escape from it. The lover is also the one who seeks union, who feels a deep longing to merge with another, to experience intimacy that transcends ordinary separation. This longing can be directed toward a loved one, toward nature, toward the divine, toward art or music that transports one beyond the self. In its highest expression, the lover recognizes that all these forms of union are reflections of the ultimate union with the totality of existence. Chapter 19. In mythology, Aphrodite is perhaps the clearest manifestation of the lover archetype. The Greek goddess of love and beauty, she personifies the power of attraction, of seduction, not as manipulation, but as an invitation to shared pleasure, to connection that delights. Born from the sea foam, she represents what emerges spontaneously from the depths, what cannot be forced or controlled, but must be allowed and received. Eros, the Greek god of erotic love, is the lover's energy in its aspect of desire, of magnetic attraction that draws opposites together. Eros is not mature, committed love, but the initial spark, the impulse that initiates connection, the fire that must then be cultivated into something more lasting, but which without that initial spark would never begin. In the Hindu tradition, Radha and Krishna represent divine love expressed through passionate devotion. Their love, although described in romantic and sensual terms, is seen as an allegory for the relationship between the soul and divinity. Radha's longing for Krishna is the soul's longing to reunite with its divine source. It is the lover experiencing that all human love is ultimately a reflection of cosmic love. The medieval troubadour, the poet-musician who sang of courtly love, is a manifestation of the lover who transforms emotional experience into art, who refines raw feeling into beautiful expression. The troubadour understands that love is not only felt, but also celebrated, expressed, and shared through artistic creation that elevates personal experience to the universal. All these figures point toward the same archetypal truth. The lover is the force that pulls us out of egoic isolation, that reminds us that we are made for connection, that our deepest happiness comes not from accumulation or achievement, but from moments of authentic intimacy, shared beauty, and love given and received. The inner lover is active when we feel our heart open, when we can connect emotionally without paralyzing fear, when we appreciate beauty in simple, everyday forms. It is active when we feel spontaneous gratitude for existing, when the touch of a loved one or the sight of a sunset deeply moves us, when we feel the impulse to create beauty or to share what we love with others. Signs of an active lover include the capacity for emotional intimacy without losing one's own boundaries, appreciation of art, music, and nature that goes beyond intellectual taste to a visceral response, healthy sensuality and enjoyment of sensory pleasures without guilt, genuine empathy that allows one to feel with others without being overwhelmed, emotional generosity and willingness to appropriate vulnerability, the capacity to express affection physically and verbally. When the lover is active, there is a feeling of warmth and expansion in the heart area. There may be tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming beauty. The breathing softens and deepens. A smile emerges naturally without effort. The body relaxes, softens, and becomes more sensitive to touch, warmth, and the closeness of others. But when the lover is asleep, there is emotional hardness and inability to connect deeply. The person may function efficiently but lives in an emotional desert. Beauty goes unnoticed or is evaluated only for utility. Relationships are transactional rather than intimate. The body is treated as a machine to be used rather than a temple to be inhabited with pleasure. Life loses the color, flavor, and deep meaning that only love and beauty can provide. A person with a dormant lover may have external success, but feel internal emptiness. They may be in relationships, but not truly present emotionally. They may experience sex, but without genuine connection, reduced to physical mechanics. They may see famous art and feel nothing, listen to beautiful music, and remain unmoved. They are biologically alive, but not completely alive experientially. Chapter 20. The shadow of the lover appears in multiple forms, all related to an imbalance in the capacity for connection and boundaries. Addiction, whether to substances, people, or experiences, is the lover's shadow seeking fusion, seeking transcendence of the separate self, but through means that ultimately destroy rather than liberate. The addict is possessed by the lover in its most primitive form, seeking union without discrimination, without wisdom. Pathological fusion is another shadow manifestation. This is the person who completely loses themselves in relationships, who has no boundaries, who becomes what the other needs, who defines their worth entirely by whether or not they are loved. It is codependency. It is love that suffocates, that devours. It is the lover without the warrior who would establish healthy boundaries. Compulsive promiscuity, the need to conquer romantically or sexually without the capacity for real commitment, is the lover's shadow seeking validation through the attention of others, trying to fill an internal void with multiple but superficial connections. It is quantity without quality, intensity without depth. Romantic idealization that leads to inevitable disillusionment is another shadow. This person projects all imaginable beauty and perfection onto the object of love, elevating it to divine status. Inevitably, when the real person cannot fulfill the impossible projection, there is a collapse into bitter disillusionment. It is the lover without the wisdom of the alchemist who recognizes shared humanity. The tome teaches that these shadows emerge when the lover is separated from other archetypes. The lover needs the warrior to set boundaries that prevent destructive fusion. It needs the healer to offer compassion without losing itself. It needs the alchemist to transform raw passion into mature love. Only in integration with these other aspects can the lover express itself in its highest form. Practices for activating the lover begin with heart meditation. One sits in stillness, with one hand over the heart. One feels the heartbeat, honoring this organ that has beaten tirelessly since before birth. One breathes into the heart, visualizing each inhalation bringing light and warmth, each exhalation releasing any hardness, any protection that is no longer needed. One recalls a moment of love, any moment where the heart was completely open. It could be a moment with a loved one, a pet, a baby, nature, or music. One allows the memory to fill the body. One feels again what was felt then. One does not analyze. One allows. One feels. One allows the heart to soften, expand, and open like a flower to the sun. Another practice is the conscious appreciation of beauty. One takes time each day to truly see something beautiful, a flower, a face, a work of art, a sunset. One does not rush past it. One stays. One contemplates. One allows the beauty to penetrate, to move one, to awaken a response in the heart. One expresses gratitude verbally or in a journal. Today I saw this beauty. It moved me in this way. I am grateful for being able to perceive beauty. One can also practice the expression of affection. If one has been emotionally reserved, one practices saying, "I love you," "I appreciate you," "I am grateful for you" to important people. One practices privately first if it is too vulnerable, then one shares. One also practices appropriate touch, a hug, a hand on the shoulder, any physical contact that communicates connection and affection. And one can work with art as a lover's practice. One does not need to be a professional artist. One can draw, paint, write poetry, play an instrument, sing, dance, any creative expression that emerges from the heart. The lover is activated through creating beauty as much as through appreciating it. It is a channel through which love manifests in tangible form. Chapter 21. The lover's body has distinctive characteristics. The chest is open, the heart area accessible, not protected behind hunched shoulders or defensively crossed arms. There is a softness in the body, not weakness, but the softness of relaxed muscle, of unnecessary tension released. Movements are fluid, graceful. They have a quality of dance even in ordinary activities. The lover's hands are open, receptive, capable of touching with tenderness. The fingers are not rigid but soft, expressive. When the lover touches, it is with presence, with attention, communicating through touch what words cannot. It is a touch that says, I perceive you, I value you, I honor you. The lover's eyes are soft, bright, often moist, with tears of beauty or compassion. It is a gaze that truly sees the other person, not as an object or a function, but as a unique, precious being. It is a gaze that finds beauty even in imperfection, that sees divine potential in human form. The lover's voice is warm, modulated with genuine emotion. There is variation in tone and rhythm, reflecting the emotional content of what is said. It is not the monotonous voice of disconnection or a controlled voice that fears revealing feeling. It is a voice that allows emotion to flow through, that sings as much as it speaks, that communicates from the heart. The lover's breathing is deep but soft, without the force of the warrior or the focused intensity of the alchemist. It is breathing that naturally synchronizes with another in closeness, that creates a shared rhythm. It is breathing that can sigh in appreciation, that can tremble with emotion, that reflects the movements of the heart. The alchemist as integrator is the final and highest role of this archetype. The alchemist takes the healer, the warrior, and the lover, recognizing that each one is necessary but insufficient alone. The alchemist is the one who says, we need the healer's compassion, but also the warrior's boundaries. We need the lover's love, but also the capacity to be alone, not to lose ourselves in fusion. The alchemist understands timing, when to invoke each archetype according to the need of the moment. In a medical crisis, first the healer, then perhaps the warrior, if one must fight for appropriate treatment. In a conflict, first try the healer's compassion and the lover's love. But if that fails, bring in the warrior's clear boundaries. In creation, the lover provides inspiration, the warrior provides discipline, the healer provides patience, and the alchemist orchestrates them all. The alchemist also recognizes that each archetype carries its medicine for the others. The healer without the warrior is exhausted in codependency. The warrior without the healer becomes brutal. The lover without the warrior loses boundaries. The warrior without the lover loses heart. Only in integration, in a conscious dance between all of them, does the complete human being emerge, capable of responding appropriately to the full spectrum of what life presents.